At 2:47 in the morning, with the rain coming sideways off the Appalachians and the power flickering twice in the span of a breath, Dr. Preston Vale let go of the man on the table and said the only thing nobody in that room was supposed to say. "He's gone! Mark it!" The monitor behind him had stopped pretending. The green line that had been jumping and stuttering for 9 minutes lay flat now, drawing one long, unbroken thread across the screen while the tone underneath it howled. Vale stripped off his outer gloves with 2 violent snaps and dropped them on the floor like he was finished arguing with something. His scrub cap was soaked through. His hands were shaking, though he'd have denied it to anyone who asked. On the table lay Calvin Mercer, 39 years old, a water quality inspector for the county, father to a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old asleep at that very moment in a house 11 miles up the ridge. 2 hours earlier, his pickup had gone off the Route 9 switchback and rolled twice down the embankment into a culvert. The county called it a single-vehicle accident. The trooper who'd pulled him out had said the steering looked tampered, then said it quieter, then stopped saying it at all. What the embankment had done to Calvin Mercer's chest was the thing nobody in the trauma bay at Holloway County Memorial knew how to undo. His ribs on the left had caved in. His heart was drowning inside its own sac, every beat pumping a little more blood into the tight membrane around it, until the muscle had no room left to squeeze, and the squeezing got smaller, and the pressure dropped and the line went flat. "Time, somebody," Vale said. He wasn't looking at the patient anymore. He was looking at the wall, at the clock, at anything that wasn't the ruin in front of him. 2:47. We did everything. Nobody could have. No. The word came from the corner of the room, from the woman who'd been mopping the hallway outside 90 seconds before, who'd carried the spare linens in and stayed because nobody had told her to leave. She was small, brown hair pulled back hard off a plain, forgettable face, a gray housekeeping shirt with Holloway EVS stitched over the pocket and a name underneath it that none of them had ever bothered to read. Her name was Della Vance. She'd been at the hospital 5 weeks. Vale turned, and for half a second, he didn't understand who'd spoken, because the voice had not come from any of his nurses. "What did you say?" "You don't have a death," Della said. "You have a tamponade. His heart's still good. It just can't move." The trauma bay went the particular kind of quiet that happens when something breaks a rule so completely that nobody's brain has caught up yet. Becca Hahn, the new night nurse, a girl barely a year out of school, stood frozen with a bag of saline in her hands. Marcus Reyes, the nurse anesthetist who'd been ventilating Calvin Mercer for the last quarter hour, slowly lifted his head above the drape and stared at the housekeeper like she'd spoken Latin. Vale recovered first, and what he recovered into was anger. "Get her out of here." "He has maybe 60 seconds of brain left," Della said, and she was already moving, already crossing the bay with a kind of economy that didn't match the shape of her, didn't match the gray shirt or the mop or the 5 weeks of his invisible night shifts. "After that, it doesn't matter what's true. Marcus, keep bagging him. Don't stop. Becca, I need you to listen to me and not to him. You are a janitor." Vale's voice cracked up into a register that embarrassed him. He stepped to block her. "You will not touch this patient. I'll have your job. I'll have you arrested." She didn't argue with him. That was the thing Marcus Reyes would talk about for the rest of his life, the thing he could never quite explain to his wife. She didn't argue. Della Vance reached past Preston Vale with her left hand and pressed 2 fingers flat against Dead Man's neck, found the artery, felt nothing. And her face did not change at all. Then she looked up, and the woman who had been mopping the floor was simply gone. And someone else was wearing her body. Dr. Vale. Calm. Flat. Carrying. The temperature of the words dropped the room 10 degrees. "Step back, or I will move you. I've done it before, and I don't enjoy it." Maybe it was the certainty. Maybe it was the way she said doctor, like it was the smallest word in the sentence. Whatever it was, Vale's feet moved him backward before his pride could vote, and by the time he'd recovered enough to be furious about it, Della had already taken his place at the head of the table and was talking fast and low, and the room had begun, against every rule of its hierarchy, to obey her. Becca, top drawer of that red cart, there's a thoracotomy tray. Open it on the field, don't touch the inside. Marcus, what's he running for fluids? 2 large bores, both wide open. He's had 3 units. Squeeze the next one in by hand. I need volume the second I open him. She had a pair of gloves on now. She'd taken them off the back table without anyone seeing her reach for them. And she was pouring brown antiseptic down the left side of Calvin Mercer's chest in one long, careless sheet. No ceremony, no painting in circles. Just enough and no more. Becca, scalpel. The 10 blade. You can't. Vale started. I can. I'm going to open his chest and take the pressure off his heart, and then I'm going to fix the hole, and you're going to watch me do it. She held out her right hand without looking up. The new nurse, 23 years old, hands trembling so hard the instruments rattled, slapped the scalpel into her palm, and the moment the handle hit Della's glove, the trembling somehow stopped being the point. Good girl. Now breathe. You're going to hand me things, and I'm going to ask for them by name. That's all. You can do that. What happened next took less than 4 minutes, and Marcus Reyes would later describe it the way men describe car crashes. Fast and slow at the same time, every detail too sharp to be real. She cut. One long stroke between the 4th and 5th ribs, following the curve of them, opening the side of the chest the way you'd unzip a coat. No hesitation in it. She put a heavy retractor between the ribs and cranked it open with both hands. And the cracking was a sound Becca Hahn would hear in her sleep for a year. And then the chest was open, and the lung was in the way, and Della moved it aside with the back of her hand like a curtain. There, under her fingers, in the cavern of him, was the pericardium, the tight sac around the heart, swollen blue-black and stretched drum-tight with the blood that had no place to go. Here's the killer, she said, almost gently, to nobody. Hi. She nicked it with the blade. Just a small cut, a careful one, parallel to the nerve she knew ran along its edge because she had cut this exact membrane in tents in places these people had only seen on the news. Dark blood and clot welled up and poured over the back of her hand and ran down into the chest. And the instant the pressure released, the instant the sac stopped strangling the muscle inside it, the heart moved. It wasn't a beep on a monitor. It was an actual heart, gray and slick, lifting and falling under her palm, weak at first and then less weak, the most violent and obvious miracle any of them would ever see. A dead man's heart deciding to beat again because someone had simply given it room. There it is, Marcus breathed. He was staring at his own monitor like it had insulted him. I've got electrical. I've got a rhythm. Pressure's coming up. Pressure's coming up. Becca made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob and pressed her wrist to her mouth. Preston Vale said nothing at all. He had backed himself against the supply cabinet, and he was watching a hospital housekeeper hold a living human heart. And somewhere in the back of his throat was the dawning, sickening understandings that he had been about to write a death certificate for a man who was not dead. It's not over, Della said, and the warmth went back out of her voice because she'd found the next thing. Her fingers, moving over the surface of the muscle, had felt the wound, a ragged tear in the wall of the right ventricle where a broken rib end had punched through, pumping a thin, determined jet with every beat. He's got a laceration. He'll bleed out the front now that I've opened the back. Becca. 3-0 on a big needle, and the white squares, the felt pledgets in the corner of the tray. Hurry, but don't run. You'll kill him, Vale said from the wall, and it came out almost pleading. You can't sew a beating heart. The needle, the rhythm, you'll throw him into, Dr. Vale. Della didn't look up. She had her index finger pressed flat over the hole in Calvin Mercer's heart now, plugging it, feeling the muscle hamster against her fingertip with each contraction, timing it, learning it. The next time you tell me what I can't do, I'm going to remember it. And I have an unkind memory. She waited. That was the part Marcus could never get over. With her finger inside a man's chest and his blood on her forearms, she waited, counted the beats, found the pause between them, the half-second of slack at the bottom of each contraction. And in that half-second, again and again, she drove the needle through and pulled it tight, sliding a small felt square under each stitch so the suture wouldn't tear back out through the soft muscle. Stitch in the slack. Wait. Stitch in the slack. Wait, 6 of them. Then she eased her finger off, and the jet did not come back, and the heart kept its own time without her. Tied, she said. He's patched. Marcus, where am I? Sinus tack, 98 systolic and climbing, sats are coming up. Marcus Reyes wiped his face with his shoulder. He's alive. He's alive. For one beat, nobody moved. Then the trauma bay doors banged open and a man in a soaked overcoat strode in, silver-haired broad, the kind of presence that rearranged a room just by entering it, and stopped cold 3 feet inside the door. Dr. Harlan Pruitt, chief of surgery at Holloway County Memorial, had driven 40 minutes through a washed-out mountain road because the night-charge nurse had called him panicking about a code in the trauma bay. He had come expecting to console a young attending over a lost patient. What he found instead was Preston Vale flattened against the wall with the color gone out of his face, a sobbing nurse, a stabilized man on the table with his chest cracked open and beautifully controlled, and a small woman in a housekeeping shirt, both hands red to the elbow, looking back at him with an expression he had not seen on a human face in a very long time. He knew that expression. He had spent 2 years of his own life around people who wore it. Get vascular surgery on the phone and a real OR ready, Della said to the room, evenly, before Pruitt could find his voice. He needs the chest washed out and the ribs stabilized, but the hard part's done. He'll keep now if you don't drop him. Who? Pruitt started. Housekeeping, Della said, and almost smiled, and the almost smile didn't reach her eyes. I'll mop up after. They moved Calvin Mercer to the surgical suite 40 minutes later, sedated, intubated, his pressure holding, his heart stitched and quiet. Becca Hahn went with him because she refused to leave him. Marcus Reyes leaned against the wall in the empty trauma bay and shook for a while, the way people do after the danger has passed. And then he went and found Della Vance scrubbing blood out from under her nails at the dirty sink in the back hall, and he stood there until she noticed him. You're not housekeeping, he said. I clean the floors, she said. That's housekeeping. Where'd you learn that? The thoracotomy, the all of it. When she didn't answer, he pushed, because he had to, because he'd watched it. I've worked trauma 14 years. I've seen exactly 2 people open a chest like that, and they were both surgeons with 18 years on me. So where? Della Vance turned off the water. She dried her hands on the rough brown paper and looked at the man, and Marcus felt the same cold authority from the table settle over him again. Except this time it had something tired underneath it. Some places, she said. You don't get to wait for the OR. You open the chest where the patient's lying, in the dirt, with whatever's in your kit, and you fix it in the time you've got, or you carry a body. You do it enough times, your hands stop asking permission. She balled up the paper towel and dropped it in the bin. And then you come home, and nobody wants the version of you that knows how to do that. So you mop floors. She walked away from him down the dim hall, a small gray figure under the buzzing fluorescence, and Marcus Reyes did not follow. What none of them knew yet, what Della Vance herself only began to suspect 20 minutes later, was that the night was not over. It hadn't even reached the middle. The man came up the back stairwell at 3:31 a.m., and he wore the dark coveralls of a hospital maintenance contractor, and he carried a clipboard and a small zippered pouch, and he belonged so completely to the scenery that 2 nurses said good evening to him as he passed. His name does not matter. He'd had 4 names that year. He worked for people who paid in cash and erased footage, and his employer that month was a regional outfit called Brennan Resource Group, which ran 3 coal ash containment ponds in the next county, over one of which had been quietly leaking arsenic and selenium into the groundwater of 400 families for the better part of 2 years. Calvin Mercer was the county inspector who had figured it out. Calvin Mercer had a meeting scheduled with a federal attorney on Thursday. The truck that put him in the culvert had been arranged, and the arrangement had failed because some janitor had refused to let a dead man stay dead, and now the people who'd hired the man in the coveralls had a much more expensive problem on their hands, and 48 hours to make it disappear. He found the recovery bay on the 2nd floor. He found bed 4. He'd done the reading. He knew the patient was post-op, fragile, his system flooded with drugs and trauma, his chart a thicket of abnormal numbers. A man like that could die of almost anything and surprise no one. In the pouch were 6 insulin pens, enough pushed into a sleeping man's IV all at once to crash his blood sugar into a coma, and then a flat line within the hour, a quiet, slow, invisible death that would read on the chart as a post-traumatic complication, a body that had simply been too broken to make it. No wound, no struggle, nothing for anyone to find. He waited until the recovery nurse stepped to the medroom. He slipped behind the curtain, uncapped the first pen, found the port in Calvin Mercer's IV line and emptied it. Then the second. Then the third. His hands were steady. He'd done this before. He did not see the small woman in the gray shirt standing at the far end of the corridor with an armful of clean towels, because she had learned, over years in places far worse than this, how to be exactly as visible as she chose to be. And Della Vance, who had walked up to check on the man whose heart she'd held, watched a maintenance contractor lean over her patient's IV at 3:30 in the morning, with his back to the door and his shoulders set in, a way that maintenance contractors' shoulders are never set. And she understood all of it in the space of one breath. She did not shout. She did not run for security. She set the towels down on a chair very quietly, and she walked. The man heard her at the last second. A change in the air, a presence where there should not have been one. And he turned with the 4th pen still in his hand and got the briefest glimpse of a plain, forgettable face coming toward him, fast and calm. And then Della Vance's forearm caught him across the throat and drove him back into the wall with a force that folded something in his windpipe, and the clipboard clattered, and the pen skittered under the bed. He was bigger than her. He was trained. It did not help him. He grabbed for her, and she was already lower than his hands. And she hooked his lead leg and turned her hip and put 200 pounds of professional killer flat on his back on the linoleum. And her knee came down on his sternum with all her weight behind it, and her thumb found the soft notch under his jaw and pressed, and the man's whole body locked up around the pain. "How much?" she said, quiet, close to his ear. "How much did you push?" He spat at her. She pressed harder, and his vision went white at the edges. "You're going to be unconscious in 4 seconds, she said, in the same patient voice she'd used to talk the new nurse through the worst night of her life. "And then you're not useful to anyone, so I'll ask once. How many pens?" 3, he gasped. 3. She let him have the white then. Flat strike to the side of the neck, clean, surgical, and the man in the coveralls went loose against the floor. She rolled him on his side so he wouldn't choke, because that was a habit 19 years deep and stronger than her anger. And then she was already up and over the bed, slamming her hand on the call light, peeling back Calvin Mercer's eyelid with her thumb. "Hey! Hey! Calvin? Calvin Mercer, you stay with me." She had the IV line in her hand, was tracing it, found the cloudy push still working its way down toward his vein, and she ripped the line out of the port with a curse and clamped it off with her fist. 3 pens. 3 pens of insulin. Okay. I know exactly what you are, and I am not letting you go like this." The recovery nurse came around the corner and stopped dead at the sight, a body on the floor, a housekeeper with her patient's IV in her fist. Blood from earlier still dried up her arms. "You," Della said, pointing at her, and the woman's feet were already obeying before her mind agreed to. "Get me an amp of D50, dextrose, 2 of them, and glucagon if you've got it, and call a rapid response, and get security to that man on the floor before he wakes up. Now. What's happened? He's being poisoned. His sugar's going to bottom out in minutes, and his heart will stop, and I just spent an hour putting that heart back together, and I will not have it." Her voice did something then it hadn't done all night. It cracked, just slightly, at the bottom. "Please, run." She ran. The next 20 minutes were a different kind of war than the chest had been. There was no opening, no cutting, nothing dramatic for the cameras. Just a small woman bent over a sleeping man, watching numbers on a glucometer fall and fall, pushing thick, syrupy dextrose into a fresh line and waiting, watching, pushing again. Calvin Mercer's blood sugar dropped to a number that should have stopped his brain, and Della Vance held it there at the edge with her own 2 hands and a steady stream of sugar, talking to him the whole time in a low, even murmur, not because he could hear her, but because she needed to. "Your kids are asleep right now," she told him. "You've got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old up that ridge, and they don't know any of this happened, and that's how it's going to stay. You don't get to leave them over some company's poisoned pond. Not tonight. Come on, come up." The number bottomed out, hung there, and then, slowly, grudgingly, the way the heart had moved under her hand an hour before, it began to climb. By the time Dr. Harlan Pruitt came running for the second time. That night, Calvin Mercer's sugar was steady. His pressure was holding. 2 security guards were sitting on a half-conscious contractor in the hallway, and 3 police cruisers were turning off the state road toward the hospital with their lights cutting through the rain. Pruitt took in the scene the way he'd taken in the first one. The body, the numbers, the woman. He sent the recovery nurse to find coffee for the cops. He told the security guards to walk the prisoner down to the loading dock and wait for the troopers there. And when the bay was finally, briefly empty except for the 2 of them and the sleeping man between them, Harlan Pruitt looked at Della Vance across the bed and said the thing he'd been holding since he walked in the first time. "I read your file, about a year ago." His voice was low, careful. "A friend at Walter Reed sent it to me, told me to keep an eye out. Said you'd dropped off the map and might surface somewhere small and quiet. Said, if I was lucky enough to have you walk through my doors, I should have the sense to leave you be." He shook his head slowly. "Major Vance, forward surgical team, 3 deployments. They told me the medics out there had a name for you because of how many you brought back when everyone else had already called it." Della said nothing. Her hands had gone still on the bed rail. "Lazarus," Pruitt said quietly. "They called you Lazarus." That was a long time ago. She didn't look at him, and it cost more than it was worth. "I came home to be no one. That was the whole plan. Be no one, push a mop, and never have to decide who lives again. And how's that working out?" She let out something that wasn't quite a laugh. Pruitt came around the bed. He was an old man and a tired one, and he'd lost more patience than he could name. And he knew exactly what he was looking at, and he made the decision in about 4 seconds, because that was the kind of doctor he'd always meant to be. "There are 3 police officers about to come through that door," he said, "and they are going to want to talk to the woman who assaulted a maintenance contractor in my recovery bay. And the story I'm going to tell them is that a hospital employee heard a struggle, found an intruder attacking a patient, and bravely subdued him until help arrived, and that she was so shaken afterward that she went home and can't be reached tonight." He reached into his coat and took out a set of keys and pressed them into her stained hand before she could refuse them. "My truck's the gray one by the generator shed. There's cash in the console and a full tank. The people who sent that man are going to come looking for the person who broke their plan, Major, and you, of all people, know how that goes. You should be a long way down the interstate before sunrise." Della Vance looked down at the keys in her palm. For the first time that night, something behind her eyes gave way. Not all of it. Just a hairline. Just enough to see the exhausted soldier standing inside the housekeeper, the woman who had been trying for a year to convince herself she could stop being who she was. "Why?" she said. "You don't owe me anything. Because a man up that ridge is going to wake up tomorrow and see his kids again," Pruitt said. "And that's because of you, and the world doesn't have so many people who can do what you did tonight that I'm willing to feed one of them to a coal company. We need the ones like you out there, Della. Even when you don't want to be." She closed her hand around the keys. She stopped at the doorway of the recovery bay and looked back one last time at Calvin Mercer, 39 years old, father of 2, sleeping under the soft beep of a monitor that was, against every law of that night, still counting out a living rhythm. She had held his heart in her hand. She would never know his kids' names. He would never know hers. Then the small woman in the gray housekeeping shirt walked out the side door into the rain. And by the time the police had finished their reports and the sun had come up gray and clean over the wet ridges, The gray truck was gone from beside the janitor's shed, and the EVS locker that had said Vance on a strip of tape was empty, and no one at Holloway County Memorial ever saw her again. But the nurses talked. They always do. Becca Hahn told it to every new hire who ever worked a night shift in that trauma bay. Told it the way you tell the stories that don't quite seem like they could be true. About the housekeeper, who turned out to be a ghost in a gray shirt, who cracked a dead man's chest with a mop bucket still parked in the hall, who held a stranger's heart together with one finger and a steady voice, and then vanished into the mountains before anyone could thank her. And every so often, on a bad night, when a patient was crashing and the room was starting to lose its nerve, somebody would say it half as a joke and half as a prayer. That maybe, if they were lucky, Lazarus was out there somewhere still, pushing a mops in some small forgotten place, waiting for the next person everyone else had already given up on.